I'm looking at a 85th birthday card from the thing that was going on in 1926.
That's interesting.
Calvin,
So that's the year you were born?
Calvin Coolidge was president.
What else happened in 1926?
Richard Byrd made the flight over the North Pole.
It's impressive.
Queen Elizabeth of England was born April 21st, 1926. In New York City, Babe Ruth caught a baseball that was dropped from a plane. Gene Tunney defeats Jack Dempsey. St. Louis Cards over the New York Yankees.
Let me ask you some of these questions. Just see how it goes. When and where were you born?
There's the name of the hospital here somewhere. Lutheran Hospital, Norfolk, Nebraska. June 22nd, 1926.
Pretty good. And then tell me about Grandma and Grandpa. What do you remember about them? What are some of your youngest memories when you were a child? Your earliest memories?
Well, I can remember I had my first piece of clothing.
That was you?
That was me. I weighed 2 pounds, 12 ounces.
Wow.
And that was my first piece of clothing.
Wow. Didn't you tell me they put you in a cigar box or something?
They carried me around. When I was born, I was premature, and they left me at the hospital for a month. And then they carried me around on a pillow, but I could fit into a cigar box, they told me, or shoe box, one or the other. And they fed me with an eyedropper.
Wow. Do you remember moving from there to Chicago?
Well, we went from the hospital, we went to move. My father had a job in Hastings, Nebraska, so we went there. And then from there, he got a job in Sioux City, Iowa, at the stockyards. And I remember going to see him at work with my mom. And then
What did he do at the stockyards?
he was doing office work. And then we moved to, there was a depression, and we moved to Chicago. And in 1933, people came from Nebraska to see the World's Fair. They stayed by us, and somebody got the measles, and we all got the measles.
So you were quarantined, or?
No, they quarantined you for scarlet fever, but we weren't quarantined that I remember. And then after we moved to Chicago, we got an apartment by my dad's sister and her husband. They got us an apartment in their big apartment building where he was a janitor. And we stayed there. and my father was trying to get a job because of the Depression, and he would go around and gather coffee cans, and he would cut the coffee cans in strips, keep the base, cut strips into the coffee can so it looked like stems, and then he made artificial flowers and put them on those stems. Wish I had one of those. But anyway, we were there for a while in that building, and my cousin Ginny and her sister Jerry were there with Muriel and I and her parents. We all lived in one apartment, and that's where I remember eating bread and gravy for a meal, putting cardboard in my shoes because of the holes in the shoes. And then my dad got a job as a janitor, and he went downtown Chicago, and he had to actually buy his job. My mother's cousin and her husband from Sweden, he was a streetcar conductor, and they had been living in the U.S. in Chicago for quite a while. So they loaned my folks some money, and my father went downtown Chicago, went into an empty room and laid $500 in an envelope on a table and left. After that, he got the job.
And the job was doing what?
Janitorial work.
For the city?
For different apartment buildings. So we moved to an apartment building. The first job they offered him was on the south side of Chicago, but the bad people in the south side had killed the guy, and my mother and dad refused to go down there and live with two little girls. So we ended up on Kedzie Avenue and 4450 Kedzie, and we lived in an apartment building in Albany Park, which was predominantly Jewish. So our building was 32 apartments, and there were 4 Gentiles. The rest of the families were Jewish, and there was my dad and us, and then the McGarrys, and the Halversons, and one other couple that we associated with. But we lived there for a long time.
So did Grandma work?
Well, when the war started, World War II started, she decided she should go work for the aircraft. And she went to work out at O'Hare, which is now O'Hare Field. But I can't remember the aircraft. I don't think it was Boeing. But she brought home her checks and put them into saving bonds, and they never touched that money until they were ready to get their new car, and they paid cash for their new car. They never had credit cards. They never believed in charging anything.
Wow.
So,
what was?
and then also to get money, extra money, my mother took in, my sister and I shared a bed. This apartment we lived in was 1 bedroom. My sister and I shared a bed, and my mother and dad put a single bed on opposite our bed. Didn't give us much space to walk in that room at all. And my mother took care of a nice Jewish lady who needed help, and her kids didn't know what to do with her. So my mother offered to take care of her. And she had such terrible arthritis, and she slept in the bed next to us and in that other bed until, until she died.
So this lady moved in with you?
She moved in with us. She became our family then. I mean,
what was her name?
Dinstog. Can't think of her first name. But her son would pay my mother a monthly fee, and they put that money away. They were savers. And then she died, and my father he took a regular kitchen chair and he mounted it on a square board, and he put roller skate wheels on the board so that we could put her in that chair and wheel her around.
Outside or inside?
Both. She couldn't walk. She had to be carried, and she was so thin and skinny and sickly, and anyway, she was with us for a few years.
What was your parents' religious background?
Well, my mother's dad studied to be a Lutheran minister, I was told, before he left Sweden. But then he came over here and he became an auctioneer. And he was a farmer in Nebraska and an auctioneer. And he traveled Minnesota, South Dakota, Nebraska. He bought up a lot of land. He was quite wealthy at the time until the Depression hit, and then he lost everything. But at one time he was out on horseback coming home from an auction, and there was a terrible blizzard. So and cattle were dying, and they were frozen, and anyway, he found this one cow, and he slit the belly of the cow open and crawled inside to keep himself from freezing to death. And that's how he stayed alive until he could get home.
How far from home was he?
I don't know.
So this would have been
In
what town?
in Nebraska.
Yeah, what town in Nebraska? Or?
Well, they lived in Hoskins at the time
Okay.
on the farm, and then they bought a home in the town of Hoskins. And then my grandmother, his wife Anna, just worked around the house. And when they moved into town, he ended up working at a tavern and ended up buying it, I guess, somehow. And he had that tavern for a long time. Now, my father's parents owned a hotel, and she was an excellent cook. My mother said she learned to cook from her mother-in-law because her own mother wasn't that good a cook. Although I remember.
What was your favorite dish as a child?
Oh,
Dinner
I don't know.
that your mom would cook. Well,
One thing I remember, my cousin Ginny and I would go to the farm or out to Nebraska where my grandmother and grandfather lived, and they lived in this big old house in Hoskins, and they had at that time they still had a couple of girls home, I think, well, Aunt Verna wasn't married yet, so my cousin Ginny and I had to wait the tables when she got married and had the reception at the house. Ginny and I waited tables, and my grandparents had this huge bird cage with a big green and yellow parrot, and they covered him every night with a cover over the cage, and somebody had set the cage too close to the heater, and they got up the next morning, the bird was dead. But
So did you observe any kind of religion in your home?
no,
You didn't go to church or?
which surprised me because I think my dad's parents were religious, but because they had that hotel, I don't think they went to church. My parents did not go to church. And when I was in high school in Chicago, my cousin Ginny and I joined a Lutheran League because she had met these kids and they belonged to it. So the two of us went to that Lutheran church, Lutheran League, and then we took confirmation there. And my mother hadn't been confirmed, so when Carl and I got married, I went and got my mom and took her to adult confirmation class.
Good.
My father had been confirmed, so I know he had a church background.
So
But we never said a table prayer probably at Christmas, I guess we did, because we were with a lot of the family, or Easter.
okay.
But
What were your parents' political beliefs?
well, being in Chicago, they voted Democratic because that's the only way he could keep his job. And my mother was a Democratic precinct captain,
Okay.
and my father was a captain during the World War II. He was too old for the war, so he was a block captain, and he would keep everybody on the square block advised as to what was going on. And my mother was a precinct captain at the local fire station, and then every fall we would get a box that was huge. It was like double big suit box, and it had clothes in it, brand new clothing. And we just waited for that to come and see what was in there. And my mother took men's clothes apart and made skirts and all kinds of stuff.
Now, where did the clothes come from?
Donated from the city of Chicago.
Okay.
You got little tiny gifts from the city of Chicago instead of, well, some people were paid to vote, I know that.
What do you remember about your grandparents? You said a few things, but what are some of the things you remember about your grandparents? Did you know all of them?
I knew both sets of grandparents, but I was closer to my mother's set of parents because my cousin Ginny and I, when we were in grade school, started going out to Nebraska to visit because we had a lot of cousins out there. And we would go to my grandmother's, and then we would go a week or two at one cousin, a week or two at another cousin. And my grandmother had the property in the little town of Hoskins. Right now, I think it's a population of less than 200. But she had this barn on her property that they used as a garage. And that had a hayloft, but of course they didn't have hay in it because they didn't own any horse then. But they had this huge ladder that went up to the hayloft. And Ginny and I would go up there and play. And we decided we were going to put on a show. So we got neighbor kids and cousins, and we put on a show, and we made tickets that we cut strips of paper and punctured holes in the strip with a pin so we could tear them apart. And we charged 2 cents, 2 cents on that ticket. And some of the elderly neighbor ladies climbed up that ladder. I don't know how they did it. Climbed up that ladder because that's where we had the show. And they had to come up there. Oh, Lord, it was funny.
Wow. Did you hear any stories about earlier ancestors that you didn't know, like great-grandparents or?
No, I didn't hear any stories about
Okay.
them.
And then you have one sister?
I have one sister. Carl had one sister. That's
And,
all we had in our family.
Yeah. So what was it like? What describe
Well, my
growing up
sister
with
was 6 years younger than I am. Today, I am 90. My sister is 6 years younger. So there was enough difference that we weren't together. So my cousin Ginny and I were closer because she was 15 months older, and Jerry and Muriel were about the same age, and so they always hung out together. And we went roller skating constantly. We'd go Wednesday night during the week. We'd go Saturday night to the roller rink. We belonged to a roller skating club, and we had a lot of fun. Then World War II came along, and we still continued to skate, but there weren't many guys around. They were all in service. Ginny and I would go to the Aragon Ballroom and dance with the servicemen.
Can you describe that house on or the apartment, the house on Kedzie that you grew up in, and
Just a big old blah sort of a building,
what was your
city building,
yeah,
like 3 stories. Three stories, I think.
and then describe your room that you slept in?
The room,
Yeah.
a small bedroom with a double bed for my sister and I, and the one small bed for, we called her Grandma Dienstog. I can't recall her first name. And it had a dresser, one dresser, and a small closet. And my sister and I had to share that dresser and the closet. I don't know how we all shared. And then one time, Ginny came and stayed by me. When Ginny would come and stay by me, then my sister would go over and stay by Jerry, because we were especially close because in the family, my mother and her sister married into the Rouleau family, 2 brothers, 2 men that were brothers. So that made us double cousins. And we were really close.
What were your duties or chores around the house when you were?
You know, I don't recall having much to do. The house was so darn small. I mean, the apartment was so small. And we just had a living room and a kitchen and a bathroom and one bedroom and a huge closet, part of which became our closet in that one bedroom. But it was just a known thing that it was house cleaning day or something. You helped do whatever needed to be done, dusting or something like that. But
What activities did you do as a family together? Did you do anything like with your mom and dad and sister?
well, it was my father always took a vacation. 2 weeks he was allowed from his job, and we always went fishing. We never went anywhere else. We went fishing.
Where would you go?
And we went mostly into Wisconsin. One time we went up to Minnesota, but mostly it was Wisconsin, and he liked to try to fish for muskie. But I think his favorite was fly fishing. And he was doing he had separate, different reels for that. And on the weekends, sometimes, well, a lot of times in the summer, my mother's family, she had sisters that had ended up in Chicago. My dad had brothers that were in Chicago. And we'd all pack our families in cars and meet at Riverview Park. And the grown-ups would sit and play cards, and the kids would run around all of Riverview Park without any worry at all. And we would have, our parents would give us money to go on the rides, and we had to meet them back at a certain time and check in with them. But that was a lot of Saturday nights in Chicago when we were young.
What did you do on holidays like Christmas or
Oh
Thanksgiving?
gosh, every Christmas, Easter, Thanksgiving, we were together. There was my aunt, was my mother's side of the family. My Aunt Verna, my Aunt Alice, my Aunt Ann, Aunt Pearl. Whoever was living in Chicago at the time, we were always together with having Christmas, the holiday dinner, and then we would, after the dinner that was about 4 o'clock, then we would, Ginny and I would take off and go to a movie, and the kids, the parents would all gather around a table and play cards. And every Saturday night, somebody was in a card game all the time.
What was the neighborhood like that you grew up in? How would you describe the neighborhood?
Well, at that time, it was very safe, a very safe neighborhood. And I took a streetcar to go to wherever I wanted to go. I never learned to drive a car until I was 30 because I didn't have to. I didn't need to bother with a car.
Were there different ethnicities or ethnic groups like in your neighborhood?
Well, in the neighborhood, there was, like I say, it was predominantly Jewish. You were either Jewish or Catholic. There was a huge Catholic church near us. And nobody thought anybody was any different than anybody else. We just all got along. And nobody made fun of anybody.
So so in your neighborhood, where would you go to shop if you needed, to go shopping for stuff?
Oh, my mother and I, my sister, we'd take a coaster wagon and we'd go up to a store called A&P, and it was several blocks. So we would put the groceries in the coaster wagon. Sometimes Maria would ride in the wagon with the groceries.
What was school like for you?
I liked school. I went to Bateman Grammar School, and I liked it a lot. When I was in 8th grade, I was a patrol officer, and I ended up chasing after some kid that was doing something they weren't supposed to do, and I fell flat on my face, chipped my front tooth in the front, but that ended that for a while. I was a delegate from Roosevelt High School to go to Springfield as a delegate for the University of Good Government. I still have my papers from there. They're up there in the cupboard.
Oh, what did you do?
And I like to write poetry.
Oh, you did?
I got a book with all the poems I wrote.
Oh, is it here?
Yeah,
We'll have to take a look at that.
with it was fun.
So, other than school, what did you do in your spare time? For fun, I know you went roller skating. What else did you like?
Yeah, read books. My girlfriends that lived near me, the Perry family and Betty Voback, there were two girls from the Perrys, and then Betty Voback and I would go, well, we'd go to high school together, and then we'd go to the local library and pick up books. And I think I read every Zane Grey novel that was written, and plus a lot of others. But for some reason, I kept reading his books.
Other than reading, did you have any other hobbies?
Trying to make up poems. And we would, when we had Thanksgiving, a few times my parents would invite a service man, a couple of them, to the house for dinner, for a holiday dinner.
That's nice. So,
And I donated blood all the time during World War II.
how was your relationship with your parents when you were a teenager?
It was very good. I never had they never set a time limit. They knew what time the roller skating ended, and then we had to get on a streetcar and wait for a streetcar, and we never had an argument about a time.
So you didn't have any conflict with them?
No, not that I recall.
And
one time, a couple of times, I did a couple of things I knew I shouldn't have done. And one was Ginny and I were, I think we were still in high school. And we decided, my sister was at her sister's house. And we decided that we were hungry, and we would go get a White Castle hamburger, which was probably a mile from my house. Well, we didn't want to wake up my parents because my parents had to sleep in the living room on a bed that swung out from behind a wall, and then there was the front door. Well, to get to that front door to go out, we'd have to go past the bed where my parents were. So we decided to just crawl out the bedroom window because we were on first floor. So we did. We had pajamas on. We rolled the cuffs of the pajamas clear up to our knees, and we each had wore, during that time, the fashion was to wear trench coats. So we each put our trench coat over our pajamas, got some money out of our purse, and went up to White Castle, walked up there in the dark through the alley, and went up there and bought hamburgers. And then we came home, but then we had to get in the house. So we had to come through the front door. But as I recall, I don't think my parents woke up because they didn't seem to know about it. And then another time when I was in high school, I decided all these kids that I know, some of them have skipped school or, and gone downtown to a movie or whatever. And I thought, well, I've never done anything like that. But I'm just not going to go to school today. So I got up and got dressed and went out the door like I was going to school. And decided instead of going to school, I would go to my grandmother's. She lived 2 blocks from school. So I went over there and spent the day with my grandmother. And then I was so worried I wasn't going to get my high school diploma because I figured somebody would know about this. But nobody seemed to know about it, and I guess I got away with it.
Yeah, today they'd catch you for sure.
Oh, Lord.
So what did you want to be when you were a kid? What did you want to be when you grew up?
I planned to be a secretary, and then I wanted to get married and have kids. And my parents wanted me to go to college, and I said no, because I said, you need your money, and I'll be a secretary, and eventually maybe I'll get married, and so we'll just do it that way. Well, that's what I did, so.
Did you have any jobs when you were a teenager?
Yes, I did. I worked in a stationery store. The lady sold stationery. She sold school supplies, penny candy. That was about it, pens and pencils. And
How old were you when you started dating guys?
I was 16, and I dated a kid that lived in back of us, a Catholic boy. Bob Sweeney was his name. And he asked me to go to a local school play, which I did. And then we went to the local ice cream or drugstore and had ice cream sundaes. And then after that was when I was 16, and then that was just that one time. And then I started dating another boy in high school, and he was, I guess he was Catholic too, because his last name was Dujevsky, but I can't think of his first name. And I belonged to the Tri-High-Y in school. And the chorus. I sang alto, and then when your father and I got married and we go to church, he didn't think I could hold a tune at all.
Well, it's just all about a joyful noise to the Lord, right? Yeah.
Uh,
So did Grandma and Grandpa give you advice about dating or have special rules or anything? Or?
Not really. I think my mother tried to tell me about the birds and the bees, and I was so disgusted with having a conversation like that that I wouldn't listen to her. So Ginny and I went out to Nebraska every year with our Shirley Temple dolls, and then as we got older, then we didn't take the dolls. But when we were out there at that time, then my mother wrote a note to her two sisters that were still living at home that they should talk to Ginny and I about the birds and the bees. Well, they were school teachers. I guess we listened to them a little more.
That's funny. So, what kind of music did you listen to?
Oh, swing music. Jimmy Dorsey, Gene Krupa, all of the big bands. I got my first phonograph when I was first year high school, or the last year of grammar school is when I got it, and then I collected records, and they still play those songs.
Mm-hmm. So, maybe we can talk about Dad, like when and where you guys met. Talked a little bit about that last night, but
Yeah.
so where was it that you guys met?
At Harry Lochner and Company, I was a secretary to the president, and he was the project engineer for a project in Connecticut. And because I was single, people in the office would say, "Oh, you have to wait till Carl gets back. Wait till Carl gets back." And I thought, well, who's Carl? So then he was in Hartford, Connecticut, and he'd got a couple of phone calls from some lady. And she said she wanted to speak to him. And when Carl came back from Hartford, then I met him, and I thought, well, that's Carl. He's got a girlfriend, and that's it. So then he called and asked me to go out on a date. And we went to a movie, and I think it was High Society with Grace Kelly. And we went on that date, and then we dated continuously, and we would go out the same door from work. He'd go down one street and I'd go down another, and we'd meet each other at Henry's, which was a restaurant, famous restaurant in Chicago, but it's not there anymore. So we would meet there and have a martini or two, and then we would talk about our lives. And he had asked me to marry him, and we decided that at that point we decided we were going to have 3 kids, and we went on to have our 3 kids. And he had an apartment on Marine Drive, 4960 Marine Drive in Chicago, on the 14th floor. And when we got married we had met in March, we got married in August, and we moved in that apartment, and then we were there for a while, and then I was pregnant with Richard, and we moved to, no, then I had Richard at Edgewater Hospital in Chicago, and then we moved from there, from his apartment into the suburbs to Palatine. But I also had Carol we left Carl's apartment and we went to an apartment on North Shore.
Right.
And that's where we stayed for 4 years maybe, because we moved from there to Palatine, and Carol and Richard were born in Chicago at Edgewater. I was pregnant with Stuart when we moved to Palatine, and he was born the following Christmas Eve of 1961. Richard was born in 57, Carol was born in 59, and Stuart was 1961. And when we were living on North Shore, we had Tessie and Larry Gauthier as friends, and they were the best friends ever. And she taught Carl how to make pizza, so I let him learn, because I thought if I learned, he'd never make it. So let him make it. So then our kids took the recipe.
What do you think?
Because he was a nice guy.
Yeah.
And he just seemed awfully nice, and he was so considerate and just a nice guy.
Did he have a lot of friends?
Not too many. Mostly the guys from the office, and most of them were married. And we had a group from the office that we palled around with. They all had birthdays in February, so we took turns having parties for the birthday boys, the February birthday boys. When it was our turn the first time to have it at our house, we took everything out of the family room in Palatine and set up 2 tables. There were like 14 of us. We set up 2 big tables and had lobster boil, and come to find out, one of the women was allergic to shell food. So Carl went out and got her a carry-out from one of the restaurants because she couldn't eat shell food.
Did you ever meet Dad's parents? Not his mom, probably, but his dad, or describe his relatives.
I never met the girl that kept calling him before I got to go out with him ended up being his cousin Rita, and she would call him because she worked downtown and she wanted to have lunch with him and catch up on family news. So then I decided, well, he's not going to end up marrying her, so I went out with him. And now I'm forgetting what you asked.
Well, about his family, like his dad, his sister, and
his mother died of stomach cancer early, and his father died in his early 50s of a heart attack, and that was before I even met Carl, so I never knew him. But I met his sister, Dorothy, and her husband, and they had 2 children, but they lived in Milwaukee, and they would come down quite often to visit, and we got along just great. They all got along with my family, and they would invite my parents to come up to their house for dinner when they invited us up, which was very nice.
And going back to your children, so what was each of them like when they were young?
Well,
You can say whatever you want.
Richard was a typical boy, outside running around and jumping over bushes and playing army. And when we moved out here to Palatine, Richard was 5, I think, and Carol was 3. And then I was pregnant with Stuart because we had moved in our house in April. And come May of 1961, Carl gave me a hug and a kiss and said, "Happy Mother's Day." And I said, "Happy Father's Day to you," because I'm pregnant again. And then Stuart was born Christmas Eve of 1961. And when Carol was 5, or Richard was 5 and Carol was 3, when Carol turned 3, I had a birthday party for her. And we had a hot chocolate and sandwiches on a set of dishes that Grandma Adeline had given me. They're from Japan, and she got them from someone, her brother, I think, during the war, sent them to her. And that was Carl's stepmother. And she continued to live on quite a while after her husband had died, after Carl's father died. So we always included her in everything, and she was Grandma Adeline. But I used those dishes and had a nice tea party for the girls. And when the party was over, Carol convinced the girls that they should all go outside and jump bushes with the boys and play cops and robbers, which they did. So that ended tea parties. Carol had a Barbie doll, and she never used it, never played with it. So I just stored it away, and now she has it in good shape.
And what were their relationships with each other when they were young?
Oh, the kids all got along real good, I thought. Maybe I just overlooked it, but I thought they did well. And Richard was playing cowboy with Carol one time and lassoed her in the family room, and she went flat on her face onto the family room floor. And we had to get her to the dentist for her teeth. Other than that, there weren't too many happenings.
Vacations or
On vacations, we went all over. We took the kids in campers and mobile home, and we just traveled all over the States. And had a great time fishing and camping. And the last day of camping on the way home, we would always stop at I think it was a Howard Johnson, and stay overnight so the kids could have a swimming pool to swim in and have what Carol called bed service, which was room service for dessert.
I'm going to switch back to Dad. So, because I don't want to forget about this. What caused Dad to want to start his own company, and when did that happen? What was that like?
Oh, I can't remember the date, but I know we had a terrible, terrible snowstorm, and he had to get to the train station to get these papers downtown to somebody to start his own business. And he just walked from our house to that train station that seemed like forever. But he just decided that he wanted to do it, and one of the other guys, Christian, can't think of his first name, said, if you're going to quit Lochner's, I'm going to go with you. So they became partners, and they started their own business and rented a small space downtown. And it just grew until it got to be about 50 people. And a lot of the engineers quit Harry Lochner to come with your dad. And Harry didn't like that, but Carl never tried to get them. They did it all on their own, and he wasn't going to refuse them when he needed good help. So we were all very close for.
And what kind of engineering, or what kind of business was it?
It was a consulting firm for roads and bridges and also parking lots and mall sites.
And what was the name of it?
Christian Roge and Associates was the name.
Mm-hmm. What was that like for you when he was starting his own business?
Well, the first 3 years he never took a vacation because he was so determined to make it work. And that was hard because he'd be exhausted when he came home. But it all worked out.
Mm-hmm. Do you know anything about his service in the Navy? Did he tell you?
Well, I didn't know him when he was in the Navy, but he was in high school the same time I was in high school, and I think it was 1943. He wanted to join the service, and his father wouldn't let him, and he told him he had to go to college. So when he graduated from high school, he went to the University of Wisconsin at Madison, and all he did was goof around. He didn't study, he didn't care, he didn't go to class, he wanted to join the Navy. So his father was so upset with him that he finally relented and told him he'd sign papers for him to go in the Navy. So he did, and he went to the Navy, and then when he came out of the Navy, he wanted to go to college. So he signed up for University of Wisconsin, and they wouldn't let him in. They told him he had to get his grades up and prove that he was worthy of going to the Madison campus. So instead he had to go to University of Milwaukee, or University of Wisconsin at Milwaukee, and if he got his grades high enough, he could go to Madison, and that's what he did.
Were there any family traditions that you tried to establish in your family?
Well, when the kids were little, we made those, at Christmas time, we made those little rings out of construction paper. We'd cut strips of paper and then make them into loop rings, and we'd hang them all over the house, and we did that for a number of years. And we were always together with my aunts and uncles and their families, And we had a lot of cousins. It was always a good time. The grown-ups would play cards and the rest of us would go to the movies or roller skating or something.
What was the most satisfying to you about raising children? And what was the most difficult?
Oh my. I guess the difficult was trying to toilet train them. That was a hard time. And when they would do something right, you'd praise them for doing it, and then they'd be happy, and you'd be happy. And I always made sure that when the kids came, when Carl would come home from the train station, that the kids would greet him at the door and not stay engrossed in TV or their fun games. And I think that was good for Carl.
That's good. What forms of discipline did you use and why?
Spanking. But the spanking wasn't done very much. And usually it was when they were so young they still had a diaper on, so that didn't hurt them anyway.
Do you have any current hobbies right now?
Right now.
Or interests?
Well, I love to read, that's for sure. I like novels.
Okay.
And I like to hear from people, but letters seem to be hard to come by. People don't send letters much anymore. They text on a computer or on a phone, and they don't even send emails. So I got rid of my computer.
Oh, I gotta ask this because you said so. You were talking about this last night. Tell me about your first date with Dad.
He drove a brand new Pontiac, a blue Pontiac convertible. And he had me meet him after work one night. He gave me the keys to the car and said I should drive and meet him after he was off work, and I was so nervous because I had just gotten my driver's license. But I made it.
Good.
I was really nervous.
What has provided you the greatest satisfaction in life?
Being with family, I think. With
So that started my uncle with that phrase and guess what he wore to her graduation, high school graduation? I almost wore a shirt that Carl did?
my sister and I weren't very close at all when we were growing up. I had gone to visit an aunt and uncle in California and ended up staying out there for a while and got a job, and then I came back home in 1955. But now that, she was married and had 2 kids, one that would have been Richard's age died of a hole in his heart from surgery, and Susie, the same age as Carol, is still living, and she's the same. And we get together a lot, and we play cards together, and visit with some cousins that are still living, and that's dwindling down. The cousins.
Okay, hang on just a second. How would you say the world has changed since you were young?
Well, it was worrisome during the war, World War II. And then after World War II, it got to be a very nice, peaceful place. And good times, everybody seemed to be working and had a job and enjoyed everything. And gradually, it's just gone downhill. People don't have the respect or they're just not as nice as they used to be, I don't think. And they're so engrossed in their own self. They should think of others.
What do you remember most about World War II? I mean, what's like the big thing that you remember about World War II?
I can remember the parade for MacArthur downtown Chicago and all the whenever there was servicemen people around, everybody just hugged them and invited them to their homes for dinner, and my parents did that, and we had lots of cousins that were old enough to be in service, and whenever any one of them would come home, we'd get together, and it was good that most of them came home.
Did you support or oppose the war in Vietnam?
Well, I didn't like it at all, and I think that ruined a lot of young men's lives. I think they started on drugs by being there. And I know we had a friend whose son was at Vietnam, and he ended up coming back home hooked on drugs. It was scary. He came home and he lived a long time, quite a while, but he didn't, he could never hold a job, it seemed. And then he'd be back on drugs, and his brother tried to help him a lot, but that didn't work too well.
Did you express your political opinions during the war, or how did you express them if you did, your political opinions?
No,
Okay.
I didn't.
Do you have any memories of the movements in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, like the Civil Rights Movement or Women's Lib or gay liberation? Do you remember any of that stuff, or what do you think about all that?
I don't know. I think some of it is ridiculous, and some of it is worthwhile, but burning their bras and that type of thing was kind of dumb. I mean, it didn't make any difference to anybody anyway.
This kind of goes almost back to the beginning. Do you know why your ancestors immigrated to the U.S.? Because it was your grandparents, right? Did they immigrate? It was your grandparents?
Yeah. My mother's mother was named Anna Anderson, and she came over from Sweden, as did her husband. He came over from Sweden. They didn't know each other until they met here in, I think it was maybe, I don't know what state, but they had a hard time getting married because both of their last names were Anderson. So they had to prove that they weren't related to each other. And then they were able to get married. And my father's parents were born, I believe, in Wisconsin. And it was his parents that had migrated from Germany. But I do want to go back to something that I'll never forget. When I met Carl at Lochner's working there, he used to send me, he'd come by my desk into where I was at the secretarial desk, and he'd give me papers to type up for him, and then every so often he'd have a note that he'd stick in with the papers to me, because we were dating, and he'd have little notes that were kind of funny. But then when we decided we were going to get married and he gave me an engagement ring, we had to tell the people at the office. So we went in early that one morning and told Harry Lochner that we were engaged, we were going to get married. And he said, oh, he thought that was wonderful. He gave us airfare tickets to the Bahamas as a wedding gift. So we waited for his partner to come in, and people were working, but when Mert came into the office, because he had just built a new home in Inverness, he was late. So when he came into the office, all the engineers from all the other rooms walked into the main room, and Carl and I were together, and we said, Mert, we have something to tell you. And he was standing there all by himself, looking at all these people facing him. And he said, and what is it that you have to tell me? And Carl said, LaVonne and I are engaged. We're going to get married. And he said, Jesus Christ, he said, from the way you were all looking at me, I thought my fly was open. I'll never forget that.
He's a funny.
I don't think any of the others will either.
That's pretty funny. It's a good story. We're almost done, Mom. You're doing great. Do you remember your first contact with inventions like radio or television or computer? So, like, what was did you always have radio, or what was the first time you remember seeing or hearing radio?
The radio I remember was an old Philco, I think it was called, that had a green eye that had a enclosure that would come together over that green eye, and when that went together, then you knew you had the channel, the state radio station at the right spot. And that was a Philco. And we used to listen to Jack Benny, and it was sponsored by Jell-O. And I can remember we were listening to that on December 7th of 1941 when Franklin Roosevelt declared war, or said that they had bombed Pearl Harbor. That was on a Sunday that we were told that.
And how about television? When was the first time you saw it?
Television, eventually my parents, one of our cousins had a television. We used to go over there and watch it with them. But then my parents finally got a TV, and we would watch the Ed Sullivan Show and all the Milton Berle and all the funny programs. And I can't think of that lady that had her own program. Well, one was Lucille Ball, but there was another woman that had her own program. They were funny.
Do you remember where you were when John F. Kennedy was shot?
I was sitting right here in my family room where I am right now. And Dick and Dorothy, your dad's sister and her husband, and the family came down. Grandma Adeline was here with her boyfriend because Carl's father had died and now she had a different boyfriend. And we were all sitting around just talking, and the news came on the television, and we were all shocked.
Do you remember where you were on 9/11?
9/11, I was in my house and I called Carl at the office to tell him. No, 9/11.
9/11, the Twin Towers in New York.
Yeah. Was he still living then? No.
Oh yeah, 2001.
Was that 2001?
Yeah,
That long ago already?
15 years ago.
Oh my God.
Tell me about it.
Time goes so fast. Yeah. Our goal. Upon the pedestal of time we stand, a human soul, looking for the best in life, striving vainly toward a goal. With God above to guide us, leading so someday we may reach his goal, so richly blessed, a life eternally.